You have said, Dr. Peterson, that there is absolutely no connection between IQ and wisdom or being a good person. Has there ever been an effort by psychologists to quantitatively measure wisdom? And if so, what is its relation to life success, happiness, etc.?
Yeah, no, we can't measure wisdom.
All right.
You know, the best we can do is measure the big five and IQ, and after that, it gets pretty sketchy from a personality or psychometric perspective. And I mean, my own sense is that, I mean, people get more conscientious and more agreeable and more emotionally stable as they get older, and so that might be part of what constitutes wisdom. We've also been sort of investigating the hypothesis that part of wisdom might be, you know, imagine that you're an introvert, but that you learn the skills of an extrovert, so you sort of expand your toolkit of adaptation, and that you're an unconscientious person, so you know how to relax, but you learn how to discipline yourself. You know, I think you can expand your bag of tricks and then match your behavior more specifically to the situational demands in an appropriate way. And that's something like wisdom, but we're a long way from being able to quantify it. And people have tried, you know, and they've tried to quantify well-being. It's something that Sam Harris really he's an advocate of that approach. I'm extraordinarily skeptical about it. I think the psychometrics are dismal, but we're not wise enough to quantify wisdom.
I'm really surprised. I've heard you say this about the lack of relationship between intelligence and wisdom, and I'm not surprised that they aren't the same thing, but I am surprised to hear you say there's no relationship at all. I mean, it seems like at least very low intelligence probably results in the failure of wisdom to emerge. Is that not true in your experience?
No, I wouldn't say that. I mean, I've seen some, I could tell you a story. All right, I'll tell you a story. So I had this client years ago, many, many years ago, who basically presented herself like a street person. She wore pretty dirty clothing, and she was pretty unkempt, and she was unbelievably shy. Like, she couldn't approach a person without going like this, like bowing down, literally, and going like this. It was like there was a light emanating from the people that she was approaching, and she couldn't bear it. And she had come to this unit on a mental hospital grounds that I was working on, and nobody had actually really listened to her when she came into the unit. And I was assigned to teach her more pro-social behavior because the way that she approached people was, well, obviously quite strange, and so people were reacting to her in a somewhat negative way. But I actually listened to her, and I tried that for a while, but then I listened to her. And it turned out that she had been in the hospital, and at that point, the hospital had emptied itself of most of its residents, and the only people left in the hospital were people who were so ruined that you cannot even conceive of it. The hospital at that point was quite an old hospital, about the size of a university. It had tunnels underneath it connecting the buildings so that people didn't freeze to death in the cold Canadian winters. And many of the residents of the asylum were down there, and it was like walking through Dante's Inferno, or a painting by Hieronymus Bosch, or a collection of photographs by Diane Arbus. Like, it was seriously disturbing and strange. And those were the people left in the hospital. And she'd been an inpatient from time to time, but well, I can tell you some more things about her. She wasn't very bright. She wasn't educated. She wasn't very attractive. She wasn't skilled in the world. And she lived at home, and she had an alcoholic boyfriend who was schizophrenic and was always muddling her head with satanic delusions. And I think it was her aunt was dying at home, and like, man, on every dimension of life quality and potential, she was in the low percentiles, you know? And when I listened to her, she told me a story about this dog she had. She used to take this dog out for a walk. And she liked this dog, and she was pretty good at taking care of it. And then she had this idea. She'd been released from the hospital and was seeing was an outpatient instead of an inpatient. And she'd actually come to the hospital to find an administrator who would listen to her because she had an idea. And she couldn't really distinguish between the administrators and the psychologists as far as she was concerned. They were all high status people. They were just all the same. And so we weren't really the right people to even be talking to. But she had conjured up this idea, and the idea was, I could take this dog and I could go get one of those inpatients, and I could take the inpatient for a walk at the same time that I walk my dog, and that would be good for them. And I thought, she just blew me away. It's like this woman, she had a rough life, man. Like, it was rough. And despite the fact that it was rough, and despite the fact that she was not an intelligent person in the psychometric sense, and that she had virtually no advantages that were detectable, she was able to look outside herself and generate this act of kindness that really required her to go out of her way and pursue it to, against insuperable odds in some sense, given how unbelievably shy she was. And that was one of the first times that I came to understand that if there was a relationship between intelligence and wisdom, there wasn't much of one. And the other thing I've noticed among my clients is that, among the people that I've dealt with, is that it's very often that intelligence allows you to drive yourself crazy in unbelievably creative and manipulative ways. Like, it's quite common for psychologists to experience phenomena where the intelligent client who's having mental trouble is in much more trouble than the less intelligent client because, well, first, they're arrogant, and second, they can argue like mad for the validity of their pathology, let's say, even though they know perfectly well that it's destroying their life. And so I really do think they're not self-evidently related. So that's been my thought and experience anyway. So.